Hello and welcome back to La Crime Noire. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you're drawn to dark, haunting stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now settle in, clear your mind, let the outside world slip away, and let's begin. Story 1, My Little Girl, was only 6 years old when it happened. Even now, I still find myself saying that sentence in my head like it might change something if I repeat it enough times. She was only 6. She was still small enough to fall asleep in the back seat with her cheek pressed against the seatbelt. She still believed I could fix anything. If a toy broke, she brought it to me. If she had a bad dream, she climbed into my bed. If a dog barked too loudly, she hid behind my legs because, in her mind, I was the safest place in the world. That was what made it worse. I was supposed to protect her. I was her father. I was the one person she should have been able to trust with her life. I was the one who checked her seatbelt twice. I was the one who told her to look both ways before crossing the street. I was the one who put my hand out in front of her when I had to stop suddenly in the car, even though she was already buckled in. It was just instinct. I was supposed to be the shield between her and anything that could hurt her. But I could not protect her from that tree. People have told me it was not my fault. Police officers said there was something wrong with the road that night. The doctors said there was nothing I could have done once the car lost control. My family has said it so many times that I can almost hear the words before they even open their mouths. It was an accident. It was not preventable. You did everything you could. You have to stop blaming yourself. But those words do not matter when I close my eyes. They do not matter when I remember her small voice singing from the passenger seat. They do not matter when I remember my hands tightening on the steering wheel, my foot slamming the brake, and the terrible feeling that the car was no longer listening to me. I lost control. That is the simple way to say it, but it does not explain what it felt like. It felt like the steering wheel developed a mind of its own. 1 second we were driving home like normal, and the next the car jerked hard to the side. I turned the wheel back, but it fought me. The tires screamed against the road. My daughter stopped singing. I remember her little gasp more clearly than anything else. Then, the headlights caught the tree. It appeared in front of us, huge and dark and solid, growing bigger by the second. We were going around 60 miles per hour. I remember trying to turn away from it. I remember shouting something, maybe her name, maybe God's name, maybe just a sound with no meaning at all. Then we hit. The crash was not like in movies. It was not one clean bang and then silence. It was metal folding, glass exploding, the engine screaming, my body slamming forward and sideways at the same time. Something in my arm snapped with a sharp flash of pain. My back felt like it had been hit with a hammer. But all of that disappeared when I heard my daughter. There was a sickening sound from the passenger side, a wet, hard crack that still lives inside my skull. Her head hit the dashboard. Even through the chaos, even through the crushing metal and shattering glass, I heard it. I heard her nose break. I heard her teeth break. I heard that small body take the kind of impact no child should ever take. Then everything went black. When I woke up, there were lights everywhere. Red and blue flashes moved across the broken windshield. Rain was falling through the shattered glass. I could hear sirens. I could hear men shouting. Someone was telling me not to move. Someone else was asking if I could hear them. I did not care about any of that. I tried to turn my head toward her. My body screamed with pain, but I forced myself to look. There were people around her side of the car. Too many people. One of them was holding her head still. Another was cutting away part of the door. I could see blood on her face. Too much blood. Her hair was stuck to her forehead. Her mouth looked wrong. I tried to say her name, but my voice came out weak and broken. Nobody would let me get to her. I do not remember much after that. I remember the ambulance ceiling. I remember hospital lights. I remember waking up to a doctor telling me I had a broken arm and damage to my spine. I remember hearing words like surgery, swelling, fracture, and recovery. None of them mattered to me. Only one question mattered. Where is my daughter? They did not answer quickly enough. That was how I knew it was bad. I had to get surgery on my spine. My arm was put in a cast. Nurses came in and out of my room, checking machines, asking about my pain, telling me to rest. But I did not want rest. I did not care if my back hurt. I did not care if I could barely stand. Every minute spent away from my daughter felt like a punishment. Physical therapy came later, and I hated it. I know it was supposed to help me, but it felt like a burden. Every stretch, every step, every exercise felt like it was taking me away from her hospital room. The therapist kept telling me I needed to heal too, but that felt selfish. How could I think about my own body when my little girl was fighting for her life? She spent weeks in the hospital. At first, nobody thought she would survive. The impact had been too severe. Her face had been broken badly. There was swelling in her brain. There were injuries, they explained to me in careful voices, like they were trying to soften the truth before handing it to me. I sat beside her bed every day, holding the hand that did not have tubes taped to it, watching her chest rise and fall under the blanket. She looked so small in that bed, too small for all those machines. Sometimes I talked to her. Sometimes I told her stories. Sometimes I begged her to wake up. Sometimes I just sat there and cried quietly because I did not want the nurses to hear me fall apart. Then, against every terrible prediction, she pulled through. The doctors called it a miracle. My family called it a blessing. I called it the only reason I was still alive. She woke up, slowly at first. Her eyes opened. She followed voices. She squeezed my hand. The doctors ran tests, scans, checks, and more tests. They were shocked. They said she should have had severe damage. With an injury like that, she should have been lucky to survive at all. If she did survive, she should have had serious problems. She might not have walked. She might not have talked. She might not have been the same child again. But somehow, she recovered. Not all at once, but much better than anyone expected. She could speak. She could walk. She recognized me. Her brain scans improved. Her body healed. The doctor said there was minimal brain damage, almost none in the ways they feared most. Every report sounded better than the last. Everyone was amazed. Everyone said we were lucky. And for a little while, I believed them. I told myself my daughter had been given back to me. I told myself that whatever guilt I carried, I could spend the rest of my life making up for it. I would be patient. I would be gentle. I would take care of her. I would help her heal. I would never let anything happen to her again. Then, she came home. That was when I started to understand that surviving is not always the same as coming back. At first, I blamed the hospital. I told myself she had been through a terrible trauma. Of course she was different. Of course she was quiet. Of course she had nightmares. She had been hurt. She had been in pain. She had woken up in a hospital with wires attached to her. Any child would struggle after that. But the changes did not feel like normal trauma. She stopped eating. Before the accident, she had been a picky eater like most children, but she still loved certain things. Mac and cheese, chicken nuggets, strawberries, pancakes with too much syrup. After she came home, she barely touched any of it. She would sit at the table and stare at her plate like she did not understand what food was. I tried everything. I made her favorite meals. I cut sandwiches into little shapes. I bought the cereal she used to beg for at the store. I tried to make it fun. I tried to be firm. Nothing worked. Sometimes I had to practically force her to take a bite. She fought me every time. Not like a normal child throwing a tantrum either. It was not crying because she wanted candy instead of dinner. It was something colder. She would clamp her mouth shut and stare at me with this empty expression. If I tried to lift the spoon, she would slap it away. If I begged her, she would look past me as if I was not there. When she did eat, she chewed slowly, like the act disgusted her. Then, she started having bathroom accidents. At first, I tried to be understanding. She was only 6. She had been through a major injury. Maybe she was scared. Maybe her body was still recovering. Maybe her mind was having trouble telling her when she needed to go. But after a while, it did not feel accidental. She would be standing in the middle of the living room, looking right at me, and she would just do it. No warning, no panic, no embarrassment. She would soil herself or wet herself and keep staring like she wanted to see how I would react. The first few times, I rushed her to the bathroom. I cleaned her up. I told her it was okay. Accidents happen. Daddy was not mad, but after weeks of it, I started to feel something I am ashamed to admit. Frustration. I was tired. I was in pain. My own body was still healing. My back hurt all the time. My arm was still weak. The house smelled like cleaning products and laundry detergent because I was always washing clothes, sheets, floors, and rugs. I felt like I was failing every hour of every day. She could talk just fine. She could walk just fine. She could answer questions when she wanted to. The doctors kept telling me her recovery was excellent. But something was wrong. Something inside her had changed. The worst part was sleep. She did not seem to need it anymore. Every night became a battle. I would try to put her to bed, and she would fight me like I was dragging her into a grave. She would scream. She would kick. She would claw at the doorframe. She would grip the sheets so tightly that her knuckles went white. Her voice would rise higher and higher until it no longer sounded like my little girl. It scared me. I hate saying that. A father should not be scared of his own child. But sometimes, when she screamed, it sounded wrong. Not just angry, not just scared. Almost possessed, almost demonic, like something else was using her throat and did not know how to sound like a child. I tried to be strong at first. I tried to put my foot down. I told her it was bedtime. I told her she needed sleep. I told her I loved her, but she had to stay in bed. She did not care. She was relentless. She could scream for hours. She could throw things. She could bang on the walls. She could cry until her face turned red, then stop suddenly and stare at me with dry eyes. Eventually, I always gave in. I know that sounds weak, but I was exhausted. I told myself it was better to let her tire herself out. I told myself she would eventually fall asleep on her own. I told myself I was choosing peace, not surrender. But she never tired herself out, and she did not stay in bed. Every night, after I finally gave up and went to my own room, she would appear in my doorway. The first time it happened, I woke up with the feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes and saw her standing there in the dark. She was in her pajamas, her hair messy around her face, her hands hanging at her sides. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Sweetheart?" I whispered. "What are you doing?" She did not answer. She only stared. I sat up slowly, wincing as pain shot through my back. "Do you need something? Are you scared?" Still nothing. Her eyes looked wrong in the dark. Not glowing. Not like in a movie. Just flat. Cold. Empty in a way no 6-year-old's eyes should ever be. Then she spoke. "You killed me." My breath caught. "What?" She did not blink. "You killed me." I stared at her, unable to move. "That's not true," I whispered. "Baby, you're alive. You're right here. You killed me." She said it the same way every time. No anger. No sadness. No question. Just a flat statement, like she was repeating a fact she had been told. I got out of bed and walked toward her. When I reached for her, she turned around and went back to her room. She climbed into bed and lay down as if nothing had happened. I did not sleep the rest of that night. After that, it became routine. Every night she stood in my doorway. Every night she stared at me. Every night she said the same words. "You killed me. You killed me. You killed me." Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I begged her to stop. Sometimes I shouted, then hated myself for shouting. Sometimes I just lay there and listened until she finally turned and walked away. It was unsettling. More than unsettling. It was cruel, even though I knew she was only a child. I told myself it was trauma. I told myself she had heard someone say something at the hospital. Maybe she had woken up confused. Maybe she remembered the crash in broken pieces and blamed me because I was driving. Maybe some part of her mind needed someone to blame. But even with all that, I never felt like she was dangerous. Not really. She scared me, but she was still my daughter. She was still small. She was still the little girl I had held as a baby. I believed that no matter how strange she became, she would not hurt me. Until last night. I woke up around 3 in the morning. I did not hear a noise. I did not feel her touch me. I just woke up suddenly, wide awake, with my heart already beating fast. She was in the doorway again. The hallway behind her was dark. Her face was mostly shadow, but I could see her eyes. They looked cold and hard. She was staring at me the same way she always did. "You killed me," she said. I closed my eyes for 1 second. "Please," I whispered. "Please don't do this tonight. You killed me." I sat up slowly. Then I saw what she was holding. A kitchen knife. She held it tight against her chest with both hands, the blade pointing upward. It was one of the large knives from the block on the counter, the one I used to cut meat. The metal caught a little light from the hallway and flashed. For a moment, I could not understand what I was seeing. My mind refused to accept it. She was 6. She was my daughter. She should not have been standing in my doorway at 3 in the morning with a knife. "Put that down," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Baby, put the knife down." She did not move. Her face looked like she was thinking. considering, deciding what to do next. Her small fingers tightened around the handle. "Put it down," I said again, louder this time. Her mouth opened. At first, I thought she was going to repeat the words again. Instead, she screamed. It was not a normal scream. It tore out of her like something had broken open inside. Then she charged at me. I barely had time to react. She ran across the room with the knife held in front of her. I threw the blanket aside and tried to roll away, but my back seized up. She reached the bed and jabbed at me. The blade caught my arm once, then my side. They were not deep wounds, more like sharp pokes and cuts, but the shock of it was worse than the pain. My little girl was trying to stab me. I grabbed her wrists. She fought with a strength that did not feel possible for a child her size. She kicked. She thrashed. She screamed right in my face. Her teeth were bared. Spit flew from her mouth. The knife came far too close to my neck before I managed to twist her hand away. "Stop!" I shouted. "Stop it! Please!" She did not stop. She screeched and kicked, trying to bite my arm. I finally pinned her down against the mattress and pried the knife from her hand, finger by finger. When it fell to the floor, I kicked it away as far as I could. The moment it was gone, she went limp. Not asleep. Not unconscious. Just limp. Her eyes stayed open, staring up at me. "I hate you," she whispered. I was shaking so badly I could barely breathe. Then she said it again. "You killed me." I called emergency services. Now we are back at the hospital. I drove there with one hand on the wheel and one eye constantly flicking to the rear-view mirror. She sat in the back seat, buckled in, staring out the window. The whole way there, she repeated herself like a broken record. "I hate you. You killed me. I hate you. You killed me." Her voice never changed. It was calm. Flat, empty. That was worse than if she had been crying. Worse than if she had been screaming. It sounded like she was not even talking to me. It sounded like she was repeating something from somewhere far away. We have been here for hours now. Doctors have examined her. Nurses have spoken to her. A child psychologist came in and asked gentle questions. They took her for scans, more scans. They checked her brain. They checked her body. They checked for signs of seizures, swelling, bleeding, anything that could explain what was happening. I sat in the waiting room with bandages on my arm and side, still wearing the same shirt from last night. There was a little blood on the sleeve. I kept staring at it. A doctor came out a little while ago with the results. He looked tired, but calm. Too calm. He told me her scans were clear. No abnormalities. No swelling. No bleeding. No sign of new damage. Nothing that could explain her behavior. He said that physically, she was fine. Completely fine. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the coat and ask him how he could say that when my daughter had stood in my doorway with a knife and told me I killed her. But I did not do any of that. I just sat there and nodded because I did not know what else to do. Now she is in a room down the hall. They are keeping her for observation. I can hear her sometimes, not crying, not calling for me, just speaking softly to the nurses in that flat little voice. I do not know what is happening to my daughter. I do not know if the accident broke something the machines cannot see. I do not know if part of her died in that crash and something else came home in her place. I do not know if she remembers something I do not. All I know is that every time I close my eyes, I see the tree coming closer. I hear the crash. I hear the sound of her face hitting the dashboard. I hear her voice in my doorway, quiet and cold. You killed me. And the worst part is, no matter how many people tell me it was not my fault, I am starting to think she might be right. Because my daughter survived the crash. But I am not sure my little girl did. Story 2. It was a dark, cold, and miserable night during their senior year of high school. The kind of night that made even normal places feel wrong. The sky was covered in thick clouds, and there was no moonlight to soften the darkness. The roads were wet from earlier rain, and dead leaves stuck to the pavement as the wind pushed them around in small circles. Chris, Silas, and Jake had been talking about that night for weeks. There was an old church outside town, hidden back behind a narrow road and surrounded by a graveyard. Most people in the area knew about it, even if they had never been there. It was one of those places that parents warned their kids to stay away from, but every teenager still heard stories about it, sooner or later. Some people said they had seen lights moving inside, even though the church had been abandoned for years. Others said they heard singing coming from the building after midnight. A few claimed that if you stood near the front door and listened closely, you could hear footsteps moving across the floor inside, even when no one was there. No one really knew how much of it was true. That was the problem. The stories were just believable enough to make people curious. Chris had been the first one to bring up the idea of going there. He was always looking for something to prove he was not scared. If someone said a place was haunted, Chris wanted to be the first one to walk inside. Silas was less loud about it, but he liked the idea too. He did not truly believe in ghosts, or at least that was what he always said, but he liked the rush of doing something forbidden. He liked the way his heart pounded when he walked into a dark place and had no idea what was around the corner. Jake was different. Jake did not want to go. He had agreed because they were his friends, and because he did not want to seem weak. But from the moment they started planning, he kept asking if they were sure. He had heard the same stories they had, and unlike Chris and Silas, he did not find them exciting. He found them disturbing. He kept saying that haunted places were usually dangerous for reasons that had nothing to do with ghosts. Rotten floors, broken glass, wild animals, strange people. Police, he listed every possible problem, hoping one of them would be enough to cancel the trip. It was not. By the night they finally went, Chris had packed a flashlight, a fully charged phone, and a cheap walkie-talkie he had bought online. Silas had done the same. Jake had brought his phone, a flashlight, and a look on his face that already said he regretted everything. They left town after dark. The drive took them along winding back roads that seemed to grow narrower the farther they went. The season had already turned to fall, and the trees on both sides of the road were thin and dark, their branches reaching toward each other above the car like crooked hands. Leaves covered the road in patches. Every now and then, the tires would roll over a pile of them and make a dry, scraping sound. No one said much at first. The radio played quietly, but the signal kept cutting in and out. Sometimes a song would come through clearly for a few seconds, then break into static. After a while, Chris turned it off completely. Jake was sitting in the back seat. He had his arms crossed and his shoulders pulled up, like he was already trying to disappear into himself. "I don't want to do this," he said. "Why are we doing this?" Silas looked at him through the rearview mirror and smiled. "It'll be fine," he said. "It's just a bunch of stories." That's what everyone says before something bad happens, Jake muttered. Chris laughed from the driver's seat. Relax, we're going in for half an hour, looking around and leaving. That's it. Jake sank lower into the back seat. Half an hour is too long. Neither of them answered him. By the time they reached the church, it was around 8 or 9 at night. Out there, it felt much later. There were no streetlights, no houses nearby, and no sound except the wind and the soft ticking of the car engine after Chris parked. The church stood ahead of them like a black shape against the darker sky. It was old and small from the outside, but there was something heavy about it. The wood was worn and gray. The windows were tall and dark, with some of the glass missing. The steeple leaned slightly to one side, and the front steps looked weak, like they might break under someone's weight. Around it, the graveyard stretched into the darkness. Some of the headstones leaned at strange angles. Others had sunk so far into the ground that only their tops were visible. Dead leaves had gathered around them, and the wind moved through the grass with a dry, whispering sound. Jake stared out the window and did not move. Chris turned off the engine. "All right," he said. "We're not going to be in here more than 30 minutes. This is private property, and if we get caught, it'll be our asses." Silas nodded. Jake did not nod right away. Then, after a moment, he gave one small nod, though his face made it clear he still hated the idea. They stepped out of the car. The cold hit them immediately. Their shoes crunched over the ground, and Jake looked down to see that the dirt beneath the trees was covered with spiky sweet gum balls. They rolled under his shoes, making each step feel unsteady. Chris opened the trunk and passed out the walkie-talkies. They had tested them earlier in the day, but they checked them again anyway. "Check! Check!" Silas said into his walkie-talkie. "Check," Chris replied. Jake pressed his button. "Yeah, check." Because they were all standing too close together, the walkie-talkies gave a loud burst of screeching feedback. Jake jumped and cursed under his breath. Chris laughed again. "Good. They work." They made one final check of their phones and flashlights. Everything was charged. Everything seemed ready. Then they walked toward the church. The front steps groaned under their weight. The door was already open, hanging slightly crooked on its hinges. It had probably been forced open years earlier by other teenagers who had come there for the same reason. Chris pushed it wider with one hand, and it creaked loudly enough to make all three of them freeze. Inside, the air smelled awful. It was a mix of mold, old wood, animal waste, damp leaves, and stale beer. The beam from Chris's flashlight moved over broken pews, cracked floorboards, and piles of leaves that had blown in through the broken windows. Empty Busch Light cans were scattered across the sanctuary. Some were crushed flat. Others rolled slightly when the wind came through the open door. "Classy," Silas said. Jake took one step inside, then stopped near the entrance. "I hate this place already." Chris turned around and looked at both of them. "All right, we aren't going to be here long. Let's split up and meet back down here in 30 minutes. If you're not back by then, I'm leaving your asses." Jake's voice cracked slightly as he answered. That was supposed to be my line. Silas smiled, but Jake did not smile back. The church was bigger inside than it looked from the road. It had 2 levels with staircases on both sides of the sanctuary. On the left side, a staircase led up toward a hallway lined with old offices and storage rooms. On the right side, another staircase went up at first, then turned toward a lower section that eventually led down near the basement. The layout was strange, probably because the building had been added onto over the years. Jake decided to stay on the ground floor. He claimed he wanted to check the main sanctuary, but everyone knew he did not want to move too far from the front door. Silas took the staircase on the right. Chris took the one on the left. For a few minutes, the only sounds were their footsteps, the groaning of old boards, and the occasional crackle from the walkie-talkies. Chris pressed his button first. "This place smells like shit." Jake answered immediately. "What did you expect it to smell like?" "Holy water and flowers, maybe." "Shut up," Jake said, but there was a nervous edge in his voice. Silas ignored them. He kept climbing. Each step groaned beneath his weight, and he moved slowly, testing the wood before putting his full weight down. His flashlight beam shook slightly in front of him. Not because he was scared, he told himself, but because the stairs were uneven. When he reached the second floor, he found a narrow hallway. The walls were stained with water damage, and old wallpaper curled away in strips. There were several doors, most of them half open. One room had a broken chair in the middle of the floor. Another had shelves full of torn papers and old church records that had been ruined by dampness. At the end of the hallway, Silas found another door. This one was closed. He tried the handle, expecting it to be locked. It turned easily. He pressed his walkie-talkie button. "Guys, there's another door up here." Jake answered fast. "Dude, don't go up there. Why? There's no telling what kind of dead animals you'll find." Chris came on next. "Or maybe that's where they keep the ghosts." "Not funny," Jake said. Silas looked at the door for a moment. He knew Jake was scared. Part of him wanted to turn around just so Jake would stop worrying, but another part of him wanted to see what was beyond the door. He opened it. Behind the door was a narrow staircase that curved upward. It was so tight that he had to turn sideways at one point to keep from brushing against the wall. Dust floated in the flashlight beam. The air grew colder as he climbed. At the top, he found what looked like an attic. The ceiling was low. Old hymnals were stacked in damp piles against one wall. Dust-covered furniture sat under torn sheets. More broken pews had been shoved up there, along with boxes, cracked picture frames, and a few rusted metal stands that might have once held candles. The whole place looked like it had been forgotten for decades. Silas moved his flashlight slowly across the room. "There isn't anything cool up here," he said into the walkie-talkie. "I'm about to come back down." No one answered. He waited. "Chris?" Static. "Jake?" More static. He frowned and shook the walkie-talkie once, as if that would help. Maybe the thick old walls were blocking the signal. Maybe the batteries were already weak, even though they had charged everything. He turned around and started back down the narrow stairs. That was when he froze. Jake was standing halfway down the staircase. Silas almost dropped his flashlight. "Dude," he gasped. "What the hell are you doing?" "You scared the shit out of me." Jake did not answer. He was standing on the stairs below him, looking up. But something was wrong. The flashlight beam hit his face, and for a second, Silas could not understand why it looked so strange. Jake's expression was empty. Not scared, not amused, not guilty, like he had just pulled a prank. Empty, his eyes looked hollow, as if all the life had been scooped out from behind them. The shadows around his face seemed too dark, and he did not blink. Silas laughed once, but it came out weak. "Jake?" Jake still did not answer. Then he started walking up the stairs, slowly, one step at a time. The boards did not creak under him. Silas noticed that immediately. Every step Silas had taken made the stairs groan, but Jake moved in complete silence. "Dude, stop messing around," Silas said. "I'm not kidding." Jake kept climbing. His arms hung loosely at his sides. His head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something Silas could not hear. Silas backed up one step. The attic was behind him. The narrow stairway was in front of him. There was nowhere else to go. "If you take one more step toward me," Silas shouted, trying to make his voice sound strong, "I'm drop-kicking you down these stairs." Jake took another step. Something inside Silas snapped. Fear and anger rushed together, and he lunged forward, raising his leg and kicking Jake square in the chest. But there was no impact. His foot went through empty air. There was no body, no weight, no resistance. Jake vanished. Silas nearly fell forward from the force of his own kick. He grabbed the wall to keep himself from tumbling down the stairs. His heart seemed to drop into his stomach. For 1 second, he stood there, breathing hard, staring at the empty stairway. Then he ran. He flew down the steps so fast, he barely felt his feet touch them. He reached the second-floor hallway, then the main staircase, then the sanctuary. His flashlight beam bounced wildly across the walls. He did not care if the floor broke. He did not care if he fell. He only knew he had to get out. Chris was near the bottom of the stairs when Silas came running down. "Dude," Chris shouted. "Where the hell have you been? We've been trying to radio you. You weren't responding." Silas stopped in front of him, pale and shaking. His mouth opened, but for a moment, no words came out. Chris looked annoyed at first. Then he saw Silas's face, and his own expression changed. "What happened?" Silas swallowed hard. "Where's Jake?" Chris frowned. "What? Where's Jake?" "He's been in the car for like 20 minutes, Chris said. "He said he didn't feel good and went back out there." Silas stared at him. "What?" "Yeah," Chris said slowly. "Why?" Silas did not answer. He turned and headed for the front doors. Chris followed him. "Dude, what happened?" "Let's just go," Silas said. "What did you see? Just go before somebody catches us out here." There was something in his voice that made Chris stop asking questions. They hurried out of the church. The cold air hit them again, and for the first time, Silas was grateful for it. He needed something real, something outside those walls. The church stood behind them, dark and quiet, but Silas could not shake the feeling that something was watching from the upper window. They crossed the graveyard quickly, stepping over sweet gum balls and dead leaves. The car sat where they had left it near the road. Jake was in the back seat. His head was hanging low. Silas slowed as he approached the driver's side door. He stared through the window at Jake's shape in the back. The sight made his stomach twist. Chris opened the passenger door. "Jake," he said. "You good?" Jake did not answer. Silas got into the driver's seat and shut the door. Chris climbed in beside him. The inside of the car was cold, too cold. It felt colder than it had outside. Silas looked into the rearview mirror. Jake sat in the back with his head down, hair partly covering his face. His hands rested in his lap. He was completely still. Silas tried to keep his voice steady. "Dude," he said. "What the hell was that, Jake?" Jake did not respond. He did not even move. Chris looked from Silas to Jake. "What are you talking about?" Silas reached for the key. "Nothing, we're leaving." He turned it. Click, nothing. Silas stared at the dashboard. You've got to be kidding me. He turned the key again. Click, still nothing. The car had been fine on the drive there. There had been no warning lights, no strange sounds, no problem at all. Chris shifted in his seat. Try it again. Silas did not answer. His eyes moved back to the rearview mirror. Every hair on his arm stood up. Jake was lifting his head. Slowly, his face came into view piece by piece. His eyes were completely black. Not dark brown. Not shadowed. Black. There was no white in them. No blue. No life. They were the same eyes Silas had seen on the staircase. Silas screamed. Chris spun around in his seat, annoyed and frightened at the same time. But the second he saw Jake's face, all the color drained from him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then he whispered, "Oh my God." Silas turned the key again. Click again, click again. The engine finally roared to life. The sound was so sudden and loud that both Silas and Chris jumped. For 1 second, there was only the engine and their breathing. Then, a voice came from the back seat. It was deep, low, and rough, like it was coming from inside a wall. "You shouldn't have come here." Silas froze with his hand still on the gear shift. The voice paused. This was a mistake. It was not Jake's voice. Not really. It used his mouth, but it did not belong to him. Silas threw the car into reverse without looking behind him. The tires spun, kicking up grass and dirt from the edge of the graveyard. The car bounced hard over uneven ground as he backed away from the church. Chris grabbed the dashboard and shouted for him to watch out, but Silas could barely hear him over his own panic. The church moved farther away through the windshield, but Silas did not feel safer. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Jake move, not slowly this time. Jake lunged forward from the back seat. Chris screamed as Jake wrapped one arm around his throat and yanked him backward against the seat. His face turned red as he clawed at Jake's arm, trying to pull it away. Jake's black eyes stared straight ahead. Not at Chris, not at Silas, but through the windshield toward the church. Silas slammed the brakes, then hit the gas again. The car fishtailed as it shot backward onto the gravel road. Loose stones sprayed under the tires. The rear of the car swung dangerously close to a tree, then corrected just in time. Chris was choking. Jake. Silas screamed. Let him go. Jake did not react. His grip looked impossible. Jake was not a big guy, but whatever had him made him strong. Chris kicked and struggled, his face going from red to pale. Silas shifted into drive and slammed his foot down. The car jumped forward. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, Jake went limp. His arm fell away from Chris's throat. His body collapsed across the entire back seat like a puppet with its strings cut. Chris gasped for air, bending forward and clutching his neck. His breathing came in rough, broken pulls. Silas kept driving. Neither of them spoke. The gravel road stretched ahead of them, twisting through the dark trees. The church disappeared behind them, but both boys kept glancing back, expecting to see it somehow following them. The car shook as Silas drove too fast over the rough road. Branches scraped the sides. Leaves swirled in the headlights. For several minutes, Jake did not move. Silas checked the mirror again and again, afraid of what he would see. Each time, Jake was still lying across the back seat, face turned away. Then, slowly, Jake sat up. Chris made a small sound and pressed himself against the passenger door. Silas almost swerved off the road. Jake blinked. His eyes were blue again. Normal, confused, he looked around the car like he had just woken from a nap. "Dude," he said weakly. "Are we leaving?" Neither Silas nor Chris answered. They just stared. Jake looked from one to the other. "What?" he asked. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Chris touched his throat. Red marks were already forming there. Jake saw them and frowned. "What happened to your neck?" Chris's face tightened with fear. Silas turned his eyes back to the road and gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He did not know what to say. He did not know if the person in the back seat was really Jake again, or if something was only pretending to be him. For the rest of the drive home, no one spoke. Not when they reached the main road. Not when the streetlights finally appeared again. Not when they passed the first gas station and saw other people through the windows, buying snacks and drinks like the world was still normal. Jake asked a few more questions at first, but when neither of them answered, he stopped. He sat quietly in the back seat, looking confused and hurt. Silas almost felt bad, but then he remembered the black eyes. He remembered the voice. He remembered Jake's hand around Chris's throat. When they finally got home, Chris got out of the car first. He did not even say goodbye. He just walked inside his house, still rubbing his neck. Jake opened his door next. "Seriously," he said to Silas, "what happened?" Silas looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Go home." Jake stared at him, waiting for more. Silas did not give him anything. After that night, they never went back to the church. For a while, Silas and Chris did not talk about what had happened, not even to each other. It was easier to pretend the night had ended the moment they drove away. It was easier to tell themselves they had been scared, that maybe they had imagined some of it. Maybe the church had played tricks on their minds. Maybe the dark, the stories, and their own fear had made everything worse. But neither of them could explain Chris's bruised throat. Neither of them could explain the way the car refused to start until Jake lifted his head. Neither of them could explain how Silas had seen Jake on the staircase when Jake had supposedly been sitting in the car for 20 minutes. Years passed before they finally told Jake the whole story. They expected him to laugh at first. They expected him to say they were exaggerating. And he did laugh, but not in a cruel way. He laughed because he truly thought they were joking. When he realized they were serious, he became uncomfortable. He insisted nothing had happened. He said he remembered feeling sick inside the church and walking back to the car. He remembered sitting in the back seat. He remembered closing his eyes because his head hurt. The next thing he remembered was waking up as they were driving away. He said he never saw Silas upstairs. He said he never attacked Chris. He said he never spoke in a strange voice. To this day, Jake does not believe them. He says they scared themselves and made it into something bigger than it was. But Silas remembers the staircase. Chris remembers the hands around his throat. And both of them remember the black eyes staring at them from the back seat, cold and lifeless, as that deep voice whispered that they should never have come there. They never found out what lived inside that old church. They never tried to find out, and they never will. Story 3. Hello, and welcome back to 101.9 The Buzz, your number one place to get news, knowledge, and all the strange little warnings this uncaring universe has to offer. Carrie, do we have anything mind-bending for our listeners today? The woman's voice that answered was one I had heard so many times over the last month that it had started to feel familiar, almost comforting, even though there was always something wrong with it. "Well, Paul," she said with a little laugh, "you know how it is. Another day, another host of issues." They both laughed at the joke. I rolled my eyes and went back to working under the hood of my car. That was usually how I listened to them. I never sat down on purpose and treated it like a show I was excited about. I never meant to become a regular listener. It just sort of happened. Out here in my part of West Virginia, where radio signals are almost completely dead, 1019 The Buzz was the only station I had ever been able to find. Everything else was static. Not soft background static either. I mean thick, angry, wall of sound static that made your teeth hurt if you listened to it too long. Most newer cars around here did not even have radios anymore. People gutted them out, or they just ignored them completely. You had a CD player if your car was old enough, or you drove in silence. That was just the way it was. We lived in what people around here called the radio silence zone, though most adults said the name with a kind of tired seriousness, like there was a lot more behind it than they wanted to explain. I had grown up with that silence. I was used to it. As a kid, I thought it was normal for the radio to be useless. I thought every town had long stretches of road where your phone could not call anyone and your car speakers only spat static. I did not know any better until I got older and visited cousins outside the area. They had stations for music, sports, church sermons, local ads, weather alerts, and traffic reports. They had DJs who talked about normal things. They had commercials for pizza places and used car lots. It all seemed strange to me. Back home, we had nothing. At least, we were supposed to have nothing. Then one day, my dad accidentally admitted to what I am pretty sure was a federal offense. I was helping him move some boxes in the basement when I found an old radio from the 1970s tucked behind paint cans, broken tools, and Christmas decorations no one had used in years. It was heavy, dusty, and ugly in that beautiful old way, with a wood panel front, metal knobs, and a long antenna bent slightly at the end. I asked him if it still worked. He got quiet too fast. That told me everything. He said it was junk, that I should leave it alone, that messing with old radio equipment around here was more trouble than it was worth. Naturally, because I was curious and stupid, I waited until he went to work the next day and dragged the thing upstairs. I cleaned off the dust, plugged it in, and started turning the dial. Static. More static. A low hum. A pop. Then suddenly, a voice came through so clearly that I jumped back and almost knocked over a lamp. "Good afternoon, beautiful universe. You are tuned in to 101.9, The Buzz." That was the first time I heard Paul and Carrie. I had no idea what I had found. At first, I thought it was some local pirate radio show. Maybe some bored people hiding in the hills were broadcasting weird comedy for anyone strange enough to listen. That explanation made sense for about 10 minutes. Then, I actually started paying attention. There were a few things that stuck out right away. First, there was only one show on the station. It was called the Paul and Carrie Power Hour, and just like the name said, it only lasted 1 hour. After that, the station went back to static for 3 hours. Then the show came back again, as if nothing had happened. Same voices, same cheerful greeting, same strange energy. Second, the subjects they covered were not exactly normal. Sometimes they talked about old mysteries. The dancing plague, Roanoke, Roswell, disappearances in national parks, strange lights over farms, The kind of stuff you could find on the internet if you stayed up too late and let one video lead to another. They had a funny way of talking about it, like morning radio hosts discussing weather and traffic. But then there were the emergency reports. Those always creeped me out. They would cut through the jokes and music stings with sudden seriousness. Paul's voice would drop. Carrie would stop laughing. Then they would report things that sounded impossible and insane, but with the calm tone of people reading school closings. Wendigos eating someone in Alberta, with details that were far too specific. Killers in the hills of West Virginia sewing their victims together into what Carrie called art pieces, like she was reviewing some awful museum exhibit. Aliens preparing to build colonies on Mars as a forward base before coming back for Earth. A family in Kentucky finding their basement filled with teeth that did not belong to any known animal. A preacher in Tennessee coughing up live moths during Sunday service. A woman in Ohio answering her dead son's phone calls every night at 3:17. Some reports were stupid and almost funny. The Loch Ness Monster trying to scam tourists out of $350. Bigfoot looking for a razor because he was ready for a clean start. A vampire in New Jersey getting arrested for stealing sunscreen. But those lighter stories were rare. Most of the time, the emergency bulletins were treated as seriously as a plague outbreak. Paul and Carrie never said they were joking. They never broke character. They never admitted anything was fake. If a monster was loose, they gave advice. If a curse had spread, they listed symptoms. If someone had opened a door that should have stayed closed, they explained what to put in front of it. That was when I started paying attention for real. I did not believe all of it. Not at first. I was not that far gone. But I listened because it was interesting, and because sometimes, when they mentioned small towns or back roads, they sounded like they knew things nobody else should know. That day, I was working on my car in the driveway when the show came back from static. I had the old radio sitting on the porch steps, turned up loud enough to hear over the clank of tools. The sky had been gray all afternoon, and the air had that damp, heavy feeling that comes before a storm, even though the weather report had said nothing about rain. Paul and Carrie were in the middle of some joke about a haunted microwave in Nebraska when Carrie's voice suddenly changed. "Bad news today, folks," she said, "because Paul and I have found another fabulous monster that might just be in your neighborhood." "What do you think, Paul?" "Well, Carrie," Paul said, sounding almost too cheerful, "I think if you are alone at your house in West Virginia, it is time to lock your doors and cover your vents." I froze. They said the actual name of my hometown. I am not going to write it here for obvious reasons. I know how crazy this already sounds, and I do not need people coming around looking for proof. But they said it, clear as day. My town. My tiny, half-forgotten place in the hills that most maps barely cared about. Paul continued, "A fog the likes of which you have never seen is coming." "Carrie, what can our listener expect?" "Our listener, not listeners. Listener." I stood up slowly, wiping grease on my jeans, and stared at the radio. Carrie laughed, softly. "Well, Paul, that means our one listener, Jeremy, has about 3 hours before he and his family do not see tomorrow. Fog crawlers are coming down from the mountains, and they are hungry. For a few seconds, I did not move. "My name is Jeremy. I know there are probably thousands of Jeremys in America. But there were not thousands of Jeremys sitting alone in that exact town, listening to an illegal old radio in the radio silence zone while working on their car. My hands went cold. I just stood there in the driveway, staring at that box like it had grown a mouth. Then, Carrie cleared her throat. Ahem, Jeremy, that was your cue to do something before you join our program. I was halfway up the porch steps before I remembered the radio. I grabbed it by the handle and ran into the house. The second I picked it up, it went back to static. I carried it into the kitchen and set it on the counter. My mind was racing so fast that I could barely form one clear thought. Fog crawlers. 3 hours. Lock the doors. Cover the vents. Hungry. My family. My town. The first thing I thought was that I needed to get my parents. My dad was at work at the factory. My mom was at the church helping set up for a dance. It was one of those small-town church events that everyone pretended was for the kids, but somehow always turned into adults eating casserole and gossiping in the basement. I grabbed the landline receiver, then stopped with it halfway to my ear. Why would they believe me? What was I going to say? Hey, Mom, a radio station that probably should not exist just told me monsters are coming in the fog, so you need to leave the church and come home? I barely believed it myself, and I was the one holding the radio. I looked out the kitchen window toward the mountains. In the distance, the peaks were already covered with thick mist. That was not unusual by itself. Fog rolled down from those hills all the time, but this looked different. It was thicker and lower, almost like it was spilling instead of drifting. 3 hours, maybe less. I looked down at the radio. Hey, Paul? Carrie? Do the vents need to be airtight? Static answered me. I shook the radio. Come on, I need a little more to go on here. The static hissed louder, like it was mocking me. I tried to think through what they had said. Lock the doors. Cover the vents. Fog crawlers. The fog was coming from the mountains. That meant the house needed to be sealed, or at least sealed enough. I tried calling my dad at work first, but I knew before I even dialed that it would be useless. The landline at the factory was almost impossible to hear over the machines. Most of the time, all you got was a dull roar and someone shouting, "Speak up." My mom should have been safe at the church if I could get to her. But if the fog came before I did not know what would happen. So, I made a decision. Hardware store. If I could not get everyone to listen, I could at least make the house safe. Boards, foam insulation, caulk, duct tape, plastic sheets, nails, anything that could block doors and vents. I had 3 hours. That sounded like enough if I moved fast. I grabbed my keys, left the radio on the kitchen counter, then ran back for it because I was not about to let that thing out of my sight. I threw it onto the passenger seat and drove into town. The roads were empty. That should have been my second warning. It was late afternoon, not midnight. There should have been at least a few cars out. Someone heading home from work. Someone going to the store. Kids walking along the road. Old men sitting outside the gas station. But there was nothing. Every driveway looked empty. Every house looked dark. Curtains were pulled. Porch lights were off. It felt less like people were hiding inside and more like the whole town had been abandoned in the same 5-minute window. When I reached the hardware store, my stomach dropped. It was closed. Not just closed. Locked down tight. No cars in the small gravel lot. No lights inside. No people moving around. A handwritten sign hung in the door window. "See you tomorrow." I got out of the car and pulled on the door anyway. It did not move. "Come on," I whispered. "Come on. Vic owned the place. and he never closed early unless he had a doctor's appointment or a funeral. I looked toward the mountains again. The fog had spread lower now, swallowing the upper slopes. I needed supplies. I looked at the glass door, I looked at my car, I looked at the security camera above the entrance. I did not know how to pick a lock. Cell phones did not really work here, so there was no searching up some quick tutorial. And I did not have time to stand around pretending there was a better option. So I made the dumbest choice of my life. I got back into the car, backed up, and rammed it through the front door. Glass exploded across the hood. The alarm started screaming immediately, loud enough to make my ears ring. I stumbled out of the car, looked up at the camera, and waved like an idiot. "I am so sorry," I shouted. "I will pay what I can, but I need this, I promise." Then I ran. I grabbed everything that made sense. Boards, screws, duct tape, plastic sheeting, a staple gun, nails, 3 power drills because I could not decide which one had the most charge, so I took all of them. I looked for spray foam and caulk, but every shelf where that stuff should have been was empty. That bothered me. Not sold out. Cleared out, like everyone else had already known what to take. In the end, I had enough wood to build a small castle and enough panic to carry more than I should have been able to lift. I threw it all into the car and drove home with the alarm still ringing behind me. I knew I would be paying Vic back for the next 10 years if I lived. And if I did not live, then it would not be my problem. On the drive home, I could not stop looking toward the mountains. The fog was moving faster now. It did not drift like normal fog. It crawled. It pushed itself down the slopes in thick white sheets, sliding through the trees and filling the valleys. Every time I looked at it, I had the awful feeling it was looking back. The whole town remained empty. No people, no cars, no lights. Then I saw a sign in someone's front yard. "The crawlers are coming. Do you know where your kids are?" I almost drove off the road. By the time I reached my house, nearly an hour had already passed. I had 2 hours left, maybe less. The fog was halfway down the mountains now. I dragged the supplies inside and looked around the house. 3 levels. Basement, main floor, upstairs, too many windows. Too many vents, too many gaps, too many places for fog to get in. I looked at the radio on the counter. I'm screwed, aren't I? For a second, there was only static. Then Paul's voice crackled through. "Definitely, maybe." I spun toward it. "You can hear me?" Static. I stared at the radio and shouted, "Assholes." Then I got to work. I boarded windows as fast as I could. I drilled wood over basement vents. I taped plastic over cracks in window frames. I shoved towels under doors. I covered the old floor vents in the living room with boards and heavy furniture. Sweat ran into my eyes. My hands shook so badly that I dropped screws twice. One drill died in the middle of the second upstairs window, so I threw it down and grabbed another. Every few minutes, I checked the kitchen window. The fog kept coming. By the time I ran out of wood, it had reached the base of the mountains. The air outside had changed. Even from inside the house, I could feel it. The pressure felt wrong, like a storm was coming, but deeper than weather. The sky had turned a dull gray white. The trees beyond the yard were fading behind a wall of mist. I stood in the kitchen, breathing hard, holding the last strip of duct tape. Then the landline rang. I nearly screamed. I grabbed it so fast I almost ripped the cord from the wall. "Hello?" I did not even get the word fully out before my dad's voice came through. "Hey, kiddo." You still at home? I looked around the kitchen as if he might somehow see all the boards and tape and tools scattered across the floor. Why, yeah, I said. Where else would I be? There was a pause. Then my dad's voice changed. It's a fog night, he said. You're supposed to be at the church for the dance. My whole body went cold. In the background, I heard him shout for someone to pass him his keys. Is your car working? He asked. I opened my mouth to say yes. Then I remembered the drive back. The gas light had been on when I pulled into the driveway. After ramming the hardware store and racing home, I had nothing left. I don't have enough gas to get to the church, I said. The radio on the counter crackled. Carrie's voice came through, bright and terrible. Emergency bulletin, folks. The fog is coming. You have 30 minutes to pray to your God. Paul cut in. Now, Carrie, you know it is cheating to call in outside help. You are going to owe me $10. Carrie tutted. Paul, he is not here yet. He can still make it, and I believe in him. I could almost hear Paul rolling his eyes. Guess he'll just have to run, Carrie. The radio fell back into static. Over the sudden silence, my dad shouted through the phone. Are you listening to me? Run to Main Street now. I'll be there soon. I looked out the window one more time. The fog was in my backyard. You ever feel your legs go numb when fear takes over your body before your mind can catch up? That happened to me. 1 second, I was standing in the kitchen with the phone in my hand. The next second, I was already out the front door and halfway across the yard. I do not remember choosing to run. I was just running. The air outside was wet and cold. The fog behind me made a sound I will never forget. It did not float silently like normal fog. It crashed against houses, fences, trees, and cars like a slow white tidal wave. There was weight in it. Pressure. It felt like the sky itself had fallen down and started crawling through town. Then I heard the clicks. Insect-like clicks. Lots of them. They came from inside the fog. The sound reminded me of nightmares I used to have as a kid, where I woke up feeling like bugs were crawling over my skin. Only this was louder, heavier, sharper. Something with hard legs was moving through the street behind me. I heard the scrape of chitin against the pavement. I heard something climb over a parked car and drop onto the road with a heavy crack. I did not look back. I ran. My lungs burned. My legs slammed against the pavement. My heart pounded so hard that I thought it might burst. I had never sprinted like that in my life. I did not know I could run a mile. I also did not know I had already run most of the way to Main Street until my dad's truck roared up beside me. The passenger door flew open. Get in. He shouted. I tried to jump, but my legs were failing. My dad reached across, grabbed my shirt, and hauled me into the truck so hard my face smacked the passenger door. Stars burst across my vision. He was already yelling at me before I could sit up properly, but I could not hear most of it. My ears were full of my own heartbeat and the clicking things behind us. Dad peeled away from the curb. In the side mirror, I saw the fog roll across the road where I had been seconds earlier. Something tall and jointed moved inside it. Then, the mirror went white. My dad reached under the seat and pulled out a radio. Not a car radio, a real handheld one, old and heavy. He glanced at me quickly and said, "You didn't see anything." Then he turned it on. "Honey," he said into it. "I got Jeremy in the truck." Is the side door open? The radio crackled. A moment later, my mom's voice answered. We can leave it open for 4 more minutes. You boys better be inside by then. There was a pause. Then she added, and Jeremy, you were supposed to be here an hour ago. I left a note on the fridge. She had. I just had not read it. The church came into view through the fog and dim evening light. It was mostly dark outside, but to me it looked like a city on a hill. Its windows glowed faintly from inside. The side entrance stood open, and several people were waiting by it with flashlights. Behind us, the fog was gaining fast. We had maybe 30 seconds. Dad slammed the truck into park before it fully stopped. We jumped out. Or he jumped out. I more or less fell, and he dragged me upright by the back of my shirt. My legs were ruined from the sprint. I stumbled across the grass, half running and half being pulled. The fog was so close now that I could feel its cold breath against my back. We collapsed through the side door into the church lobby. The second we were inside, the doors slammed shut behind us. People moved like a pit crew. Pews were dragged and shoved against the entrance. Heavy wooden beams were dropped into brackets I had never noticed before. Metal covers were slid over vents. Towels were jammed under door gaps. A man I recognized from the grocery store was praying under his breath while drilling a board into place. My mom stepped away from the team at the door and turned toward my dad. I told you to tell Jeremy about Fog Night years ago, she said. You are having this conversation right now, Carl, or I swear to God. Then the fog hit the church. It did not hit like weather. It hit like a living thing, pressing its whole body against the building. The walls groaned. The doors shook. The windows went white. The pressure inside the room changed so fast that my ears popped. It felt like being swallowed by something massive. My mom shivered, then looked at me. Her face softened. She kissed my cheek. You did good, honey, she said. Then she glared at my dad again. I'll be in the basement. You two can join me after you have your talk. She went downstairs. Everyone else followed, like this was normal. I heard kids laughing below. Music started up. Plates clattered. Someone asked who brought the potato salad. The church dance, or potluck, or whatever it was supposed to be, had already begun in the basement while the world outside was being eaten by fog. Dad and I stood alone in the lobby. For about 10 minutes, he explained the apocalypse to me with the same awkward energy as a father trying to explain puberty. Every now and then, we heard screams in the distance. He told me the town had been dealing with fog nights since the 1950s. Every third month, on the 30th, the fog came down from the mountains. Nobody knew exactly why. Nobody knew where the crawlers came from. They only knew that if the town gathered inside the church before 5 in the evening and sealed the doors, most people survived. Most? I asked. Dad looked away. He said if the town tried to leave, the fog followed. If everyone abandoned the place, it would move to the next town, then the next. He said people had tried everything. Fire, guns, chemicals, prayer, government help. Nothing stopped it for good. The best they could do was hide together and wait for sunrise. He apologized for not telling me sooner. He said he thought he had more time. He said kids were usually told when they were younger, but Mom wanted to wait because she thought it would scare me too badly. Then, somehow, between waiting and normal life, they just never said it. I stared at him. You forgot to tell me we were cursed? He winced. That's not exactly how I'd say it. That's exactly how I'd say it. Then he asked what I had been doing at the house. When I told him I had heard the fog was coming and tried to seal the place, his face changed. I told him about the old radio, the Buzz, Paul, Carrie, and how they had spoken to me by name. Dad went very quiet. "Listen," he said at last, "I don't know what you were hearing, Jeremy, but it helped you. So we'll keep that between us." I wanted to ask more, but he put a hand on my shoulder. "From now on," he said, "on the 30th of every third month, you are at the church by 5 in the evening. No excuses. No stopping at home. No finishing chores. No thinking you have time. Understand?" I nodded. "Good lad," he said. "Now let's get downstairs. I hear there's pie." As we started toward the basement stairs, his radio crackled to life. Paul's voice came through, clear and cheerful. "Damn," he said. "Didn't think he would make it. Here's your 10, Carrie. I know when I'm licked." Carrie laughed softly. "Never doubt our listener, Paul." Then the radio went silent. I followed my dad downstairs, where half the town was eating pie and pretending there were not monsters clicking through the fog outside. And that was how I learned about Fog Night. Story 4. The specimen does not usually travel far from the person it is bitten. Once the bite has been delivered, the creature tends to stay close, almost as if it is waiting for something. When it is not hunting for food, it is most often found pressed flat into the upper corner of a room, usually where the ceiling meets the wall. In that position, it can remain still for hours or even days. At first glance, it may look like a shadow, a dark stain, or a large patch of dampness. But if watched closely, its legs can be seen tucked against its body, and sometimes its body shifts slightly with slow, patient breathing. This behavior has not been fully understood. The creature does not protect the person it has bitten. It does not attack anyone who tries to help the bitten person, at least not unless it is directly threatened or hungry. It does not seem to guide the process in any active way. It simply stays near the victim and watches. One early idea was that the creature needed time to recover after using its venom. Since the bite appears to involve a large release of poison into the victim's body, some researchers believed the spider had to rest while its venom glands refilled. That theory seemed reasonable at first, but no strong evidence has ever supported it. The spider has been seen feeding shortly after biting someone. It has also been seen biting more than one subject in a short period of time, although that is rare. Because of that, the less pleasant theory is now the one most researchers accept. The creature may simply enjoy watching the process. It may feel some kind of reward from seeing the bitten person change. This is hard to prove, because the creature cannot be questioned and shows almost no readable expression. But its behavior gives that impression. It waits. It watches. It stays close, even when it does not need to. The victim, usually called the bitten, often begins with mental symptoms before any serious physical changes can be seen. In the earliest hours after the bite, they may act almost normal. They may speak clearly, walk normally, and answer questions in a way that seems calm. But certain signs appear very quickly. The bitten person will often refuse to look at the spider, even when it is clearly visible in the room. They may act as if it is not there. If someone points at it, they may look away or change the subject. If shown a picture of the creature, they may say they do not know what it is, even if they were bitten only minutes earlier. They also deny that the bite happened at all. This denial is not simple lying. In many cases, the bitten person appears to truly believe what they are saying. If there is a visible puncture wound, they may claim it is an old injury, a rash, a scrape, or nothing at all. If the bite is bleeding or swollen, they may become annoyed when anyone mentions it. In some cases, they grow angry and accuse others of trying to scare them. Another early sign is a strange protective feeling toward the spider. The victim may not admit the spider exists, but when someone threatens to kill it or remove it, the bitten person becomes upset. They might step between the spider and the person trying to harm it. They might say, "Leave it alone," or "It is not hurting anyone." This is especially strange because only moments before, the same person may have denied seeing the spider at all. They also deny having any symptoms. If they are sweating, shaking, or breathing too fast, they say they are fine. If their skin begins to darken around the bite, they say it has always looked that way. If they can no longer focus their eyes properly, they claim they are just tired. The mind seems to start protecting the infection before the body has fully begun to change. As the process moves into the second stage, the physical transformation becomes much harder to ignore. This is when the body begins to rebuild itself from the inside. The bones of the face and skull begin to shift. At first, the change may seem like swelling. The cheeks puff out. The jaw tightens. The forehead grows tender. The bitten person may complain of a dull headache or pressure behind the eyes. But soon, the changes become worse. The bones move and bend in ways human bones should not. The face may stretch in places, sink in others, and grow uneven as the body prepares space for new structures. The new eyes begin forming first. They do not replace the old eyes right away. Instead, they develop around them, pressing against the bone and skin. Small, dark marks may appear above the eyebrows, along the cheekbones, or near the temples. These marks slowly open into wet, black points. Over time, they become more like eyes, though they do not move like human eyes. They shine faintly in low light, and often focus on movement rather than faces. Venom glands also start forming inside the jaw and throat. This causes swelling along the neck, under the chin, and near the sides of the mouth. The bitten person may have trouble speaking. Their voice may grow thick or wet. Sometimes they choke on their own saliva. They may complain that their mouth tastes bitter, like metal or spoiled fruit. The fangs begin to grow during this stage as well. They usually push down from the upper jaw, forcing the mouth to widen. The gums split. The teeth loosen. Several normal teeth may fall out, though the victim often refuses to admit this is happening. Even when their mouth is bleeding, even when their speech is slurred, they continue to deny that anything is wrong. The pain during this stage appears to be extreme. The bitten person may cry, sweat, shake, or clutch their face and stomach. They may curl up on the floor or strike nearby objects in panic. But if asked what is wrong, they often answer with the same phrase. "There is no poison coursing through me." They say it exactly like that. "Not I am not poisoned. Not there is no venom in me. Not nothing is wrong." Always the same sentence. "There is no poison coursing through me." This is one of the strangest parts of the condition. The people affected come from different places. They speak in different ways. Some are highly educated. Some are children. Some speak casually. Some use slang. Some do not normally use words like coursing at all. But once the venom reaches this stage, the same phrase appears again and again, word for word, without change. This suggests that the venom is doing more than attacking the body. It may be carrying information. It may have a message built into it. Somehow, the poison forces that exact sentence through the victim's mind and out of their mouth. It ignores personality, memory, speech habits, and language style. It pushes the words through like a command. The exact reason for this is still unknown. One possibility is that the venom has a kind of simple intelligence. Not intelligence like a person, but something closer to instruction. A program. A pattern. A set of rules buried inside the poison itself. If that is true, then the venom does not simply change the body. It teaches the body what to become, and teaches the mind what to say while it is becoming it. More research is needed, though research is difficult. Once the bitten reaches the later stages, they become dangerous to everyone around them. By the third stage, the victim has lost most control over their own body. They can still speak, and sometimes they can still sound like themselves, but their actions are no longer fully their own. They begin trying to calm any uninfected people nearby. This reassurance is not kind or comforting. It is repeated too often, spoken at the wrong times, and paired with movements that do not match the words. They may walk toward someone with their arms open, smiling through a mouth that no longer fits their face. They may say, "I am fine," while their jaw splits wider. They may say, "You do not need to be afraid," while crawling across the ceiling. Most often, they continue repeating the same phrase, "There is no poison coursing through me." They say it again and again. Sometimes they whisper it. Sometimes they shout it. Sometimes they say it while crying. Sometimes they say it while their body moves toward another person with the clear purpose of biting them. At this stage, the bitten will attempt to infect or feed on uninfected individuals. The exact difference between feeding and spreading the condition is not always clear. Some bites result in another infection. Others seem to be simple feeding attacks, where the victim uses the newly formed fangs to drain blood or tissue. The body is still changing, and it appears to need a large amount of food to finish the process. There have been rare reports from victims who remain slightly aware during this stage. These cases are uncommon, and the reports are broken and difficult to trust. Still, several of them describe the same thing, a voice inside the head. The voice repeats one word: bite. It does not speak in full sentences. It does not explain. It does not threaten. It simply repeats the word quickly, over and over, faster than normal thought. Bite, 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 bite. Even when these victims later described hearing the voice, they could not connect it to the bite or the spider. They would speak of the voice, then immediately deny being infected. They might say, "Something was telling me to bite," and then, moments later, add, "But there was no poison in me." This mental wall remains one of the most frightening parts of the condition. The bitten can sometimes speak about what they feel, what they hear, and what they see, but they cannot fully understand what it means. Their mind circles the truth without touching it. They may describe every symptom, yet deny the condition itself. Because of this, it is believed that most bitten who reach the third stage are trapped in a constant state of psychosis. They are awake, but not truly aware. They see the world through a broken lens. They may recognize people, rooms, voices, and danger, but they cannot understand their own place in it. They cannot accept that they are changing. They cannot accept that the spider is real. They cannot accept that the poison is inside them. By the fourth stage, the victim's mind begins to collapse more severely. The easiest way to describe it, though not scientifically perfect, is that the mind becomes full of holes. Thoughts slip away. Memory breaks. Simple ideas become hard to hold. The bitten may behave like someone suffering from advanced dementia. They may forget where they are. They may forget the names of people they knew well. They may start a sentence and lose it halfway through. They may repeat questions. They may stare at their own hands as if they do not belong to them. Sometimes they speak to people who are not there. Sometimes they answer questions that were never asked. A conversation is still possible with some bitten during this stage, but it becomes difficult and unsafe. A subject may seem calm for several minutes, then suddenly crawl toward the ceiling without warning. Another may cry and ask for their mother, then turn and bite the nearest person. Their attention comes and goes. Their awareness flickers like a dying light. The body continues to change during this time. The extra eyes grow larger and more useful. The fangs become stronger. The fingers stiffen and may curl into hooked shapes. The joints begin to bend with less concern for normal human limits. The skin may grow tight, pale, and thin in some places, while darkening into hard plates in others. The original spider, the one that caused the bite, usually remains nearby during this stage. It watches from its corner. It may move from room to room if the victim is moved, but it rarely helps. It does not comfort the victim. It does not feed them. It does not defend them unless it is directly threatened. It simply watches the damage unfold. The fifth stage is where the process becomes most disturbing, because the victim's mind seems to return in pieces. At first, this can look like improvement. The bitten may speak more clearly. They may recognize where they are. They may remember names, dates, or personal details. But this is not true recovery. It is something much crueler. It is believed that whatever stops the victim from understanding their condition begins to weaken at this stage. The transformation has gone so far that denial is no longer useful. The body is almost finished, becoming something else. The mind is no longer needed as a shield. When the bitten believes they are alone, they may become lucid. They may cry. They may whisper for help. They may beg for someone to kill them. They often describe terrible pain. They say their bones feel like they are grinding inside their skin. They say their jaw feels too wide. They say something is pushing from behind their eyes. They say their body keeps moving even when they beg it to stop. Some have been recorded saying things like, "I do not want to stand up," while their body rises. Others have said, "Please do not make me crawl," while their limbs bend and pull them up the wall. In these moments, it seems that some part of the original person is still trapped inside, forced to watch their own body move without permission. How much they truly understand is still unknown. But what remains of them seems aware enough to suffer. They understand fear. They understand pain. They understand that something terrible has happened. They may not understand all of it, but they understand enough. This awareness disappears the moment an uninfected person is detected. If someone enters the room, speaks nearby, or is seen by one of the new eyes, the bitten changes instantly. Their crying stops. Their face stills. Their voice becomes calm again. They return to hunting behavior, often speaking in that same reassuring tone from earlier stages. "There is no poison coursing through me." They may say it with tears still on their face. They may say it while their hands claw at the floor. They may say it while moving toward the person they are about to bite. Once the uninfected person leaves or hides well enough, the victim may return to crying, begging, or screaming. This cycle can repeat many times. It is not known whether the hunting state fully replaces the victim's consciousness or simply pushes it deep enough that they cannot act against it. It is also during the fifth stage that the original spider loses interest. After staying close through most of the process, it finally leaves. Usually, it slips away quietly while the victim is alone. It may travel through vents, cracks, crawl spaces, or open windows. Its goal appears to be finding a new host to bite. This suggests that the spider knows in some way that the process is almost finished. Its work with the first victim is done. The bitten no longer needs to be watched. The sixth stage is the final stage. It begins with molting. By this point, the body has been fully remade. The mind has been rewritten, broken down, and shaped into something that can serve the new creature. The bitten is no longer truly human in any normal sense, though it remains unclear whether anything of the original person still survives. During molting, the newly grown spider forces its way out of the bitten body. The process usually begins at the face. The skin stretches, splits, and opens around the eyes, mouth, and forehead. The new spider pushes outward from inside the skull and upper body, using the victim's remaining structure like a shell. What remains of the brain is not discarded. Instead, it appears to become part of the spider's inner abdominal structure. This is one of the most disturbing discoveries made during examination. The brain tissue is not simply destroyed. It is taken in, reshaped, and carried inside the new spider. After the spider emerges, the body left behind has a wide, empty cavity where the face used to be. The skull is opened from within. The jaw is usually broken or missing. The eyes, both old and new, are gone. In some cases, parts of the mouth and throat remain, but they no longer serve any purpose. The new spider is fully active shortly after emergence. It does not behave like a confused newborn animal. It moves with purpose. It avoids bright light. It hides in upper corners. It hunts when hungry. It reacts violently to attempts at capture. No communication with the new spider has ever been successful. It does not respond to its former name. It does not react to loved ones in any recognizable way. It does not show signs of memory, regret, or emotion that can be understood. It is hostile at all times. The greatest unanswered question is whether the original victim still exists inside it. Some researchers believe the answer is no. They argue that the person is gone by the sixth stage, replaced completely by the new organism. The brain tissue may remain, but only as meat, structure, or fuel. In that view, the spider is not the person. It is something born from them. Others are less certain. Because parts of the brain are carried inside the spider, it is possible that some broken piece of the victim's mind remains. Not enough to speak, not enough to control the body, not enough to be helped. But perhaps enough to feel, enough to know, enough to remain trapped inside a creature that now exists only to bite, feed, and spread the condition. There is no way to confirm this yet. The spider cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be comforted. It cannot be safely approached. Once the final stage is complete, the reproduction cycle is considered finished. The newly grown spider will leave the remains behind, find a quiet place to hide, and wait. When the time comes, it will choose another person. It will bite. Then it will climb into a ceiling corner, flatten itself against the wall, and watch the whole process begin again. Story 5. Billy Batts sat alone in the middle of his old wooden house, spinning the cylinder of his revolver over and over again. Click, whirl, click, whirl, click. To most people, it would have been an annoying sound. To Billy, it was music. It was the sound that kept his mind steady. It was the sound that reminded him he was still a man, still alive, still ready to defend his home from whatever darkness waited outside. The house around him was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall and the soft groan of old wood settling under the weight of the night. The place had been standing for longer than Billy cared to remember. It had crooked floorboards, a roof that complained whenever the wind blew too hard, and windows that rattled even when there was no storm. The wallpaper had peeled in the corners, and dust sat heavy on every shelf, but it was his home. It had been his for years, and no creature of the night was going to take it from him. Billy leaned back in his chair and narrowed his eyes at the clock. The hands were almost at midnight. He knew what that meant. Every night, right around 12, it came. He did not know where it came from. He did not know why it had chosen him. He only knew that for 3 nights in a row, a terrible creature had been stalking the outside of his home. It moved in the darkness. It watched through the windows. It made a sound so cold and strange that it crawled under his skin and squeezed his heart. That sound had followed him into his dreams. He had heard it outside the kitchen door. He had heard it near the woodpile. He had heard it somewhere beneath the porch, soft and steady, like the whisper of a demon trying to get inside. Billy lifted the whiskey bottle from the table and took one last drink. The whiskey burned down his throat, but it made him feel brave, or at least braver than he had felt a few minutes ago. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and let out a long breath. All right, he muttered to himself. Old Billy Boy ain't running tonight. His voice sounded small in the dark house, so he made it louder. No, sir, not tonight. Not in my house. He set the bottle down carefully because there was still a little whiskey left inside. And even in a battle against evil, a man had to respect the important things in life. Then he picked up his white cowboy hat from the table and placed it on his head. It was an old hat, worn at the edges and stained from years of dust, sweat, and bad weather. But when Billy put it on, he felt like the man he used to be. A man who had ridden horses across open land. A man who had chased trouble and sometimes caused it. A man who had looked danger in the face and laughed. His knees popped when he stood, and his back gave a sharp warning. But Billy ignored both. The clock hit 12. His spurs chimed as he took one slow step forward. Then, another. The air inside the room seemed to change. It became colder. He could feel it on his neck. The shadows in the corners grew deeper. The kitchen looked farther away than it should have. The hallway behind him looked darker than it had a moment ago. Billy raised his revolver toward the front window. The gun was old and rusty, but it had never failed him. At least, not in any way he was willing to admit. He held it with both hands and stared into the blackness beyond the glass. "Whew," Billy whispered. "Here we go, old Billy Boy." For several seconds, nothing happened. The clock ticked. The wind brushed against the house. Billy's finger rested on the trigger. Then, from somewhere outside the window, the creature spoke. "Meow," Billy screamed and fired. The revolver exploded in his hands with a flash of light and a loud crack. The window shattered, sending pieces of glass across the floor. Billy stumbled backward, almost falling over his chair. His ears rang, and smoke curled from the barrel of the gun. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing hard. Then he leaned forward and looked through the broken window, careful not to step on the glass. The monster was nowhere to be seen. Billy grinned. "Aha," he said, his voice shaking but proud. "That's what I thought. Not tonight, foul beast." The darkness outside gave no answer. Billy raised the gun higher. "I warned you," he called out. "You picked the wrong house." Then the sound came again. Meow. Billy fired another shot into the night. The bullet vanished into the darkness, and somewhere far off, a tin can fell over with a sharp clatter. "Not tonight, demon," Billy shouted. "You're going back to the hell from which you rose." The only answer was soft, calm, and terrible. Meow. Billy's eyes went wide. I said back, "Foul devil." He fired again, then again, then again. The revolver roared 4 more times, and Billy threw himself backward across the room as if he had just escaped a blast of fire. He landed hard on the floor, knocking over a stack of old newspapers and nearly kicking the whiskey bottle off the table. Reloading. He screamed, though there was no one there to hear him except whatever nightmare waited outside. His hands shook as he crawled toward the table and grabbed the box of bullets. The little brass rounds slipped between his fingers as he tried to load the revolver. One rolled under the chair, another fell into his boot. He cursed under his breath, then louder again. "Hold still, you cursed little shining things." At last, he managed to put 6 fresh bullets into the cylinder. He snapped it shut with a proud nod, even though his hands were still trembling. The house went silent. Billy slowly got back to his feet. He looked at the broken window. The curtain moved in the breeze, drifting in and out like a ghost's hand. Then he heard it, a small sound, a soft thump. Something had jumped through the broken window and landed inside the room. Billy froze. The darkness near the window seemed to move. Then, from the shadows, the beast cried out in the voice of the devil. Meow. Billy fired 3 shots into the room. The first bullet smashed a plate on the wall. The second hit a shelf and sent 2 mugs crashing to the floor. The third blasted through an old picture frame and left a hole right through the face of Billy's late Uncle Roy. Glass, crockery, and dust filled the air. Then everything became quiet. Billy stood with his revolver stretched out in front of him. His breathing was loud. His eyes darted from one corner of the room to the other. "Ah ha ha," he said, laughing in short, nervous bursts. "There's more where that came from. Night demon." The room gave no answer. Billy took 1 step forward. A floorboard creaked behind him. He turned slowly. Nothing, he turned back toward the window. Still nothing. The creature was clever. He knew that now. It did not fight like a normal animal. It did not charge straight ahead. It moved in silence. It waited. It played with him. It wanted him tired, scared, and confused. But Billy Batts would not be fooled. He had survived tax collectors, broken horses, 2 bad marriages, and a chili contest in Texas that had nearly sent him to the hospital. He would survive this, too. He moved through the room with careful steps, his spurs making soft little chimes against the floor. The broken glass crunched under his boots. He checked behind the armchair. Nothing. He checked under the table. Nothing. He leaned toward the old cabinet and pointed the gun at the gap beneath it. "Come on out," he whispered. I know you're in here." For a moment, he heard only his own breathing. Then something brushed against his leg. Billy looked down. A black cat sat right beside his boot, staring up at him with bright green eyes. Billy's soul nearly left his body. The cat opened its little mouth. Meow, Billy jumped so hard that his hat flew off his head. He fired 3 times before he even knew what he was doing. One bullet hit the floor. Another hit the ceiling. The third hit nothing at all and left the house ringing with noise. Yah! Billy screamed. He backed away so fast that he tripped over his own chair. Somehow, he did not fall. He spun around, grabbed the stair rail, and ran. For an old man with stiff knees and bad balance, Billy moved faster than he had moved in years. His spurs rang wildly as he climbed the stairs 2 at a time. He kept looking back over his shoulder, sure that the black creature was right behind him with its glowing eyes and wicked little paws. He reached the top of the stairs, turned into his bedroom, and dove onto his bed. The bed groaned under him. Billy pulled the blanket up to his chin and aimed his revolver at the bedroom door. His hands shook so badly that the gun wobbled in the air. The room smelled like old wood, whiskey, gun smoke, and fear. Billy waited. Downstairs, something moved. A soft step. Then another. Then a tiny bell-like sound from a piece of broken glass being touched. Billy swallowed. "I hear you," he called. "Don't think I don't." There was no answer. The bedroom door was open just a few inches. Beyond it, the hallway looked dark and narrow. Billy kept the gun pointed at that thin black gap. His whole body was wrapped tight in the blanket. Only his hatless head, shaking hands, and revolver were visible. The stairs creaked. Billy's heart slammed in his chest. Another creak. Then another. The beast was coming up. Billy's mouth went dry. He thought about his life. He thought about his younger days, when he had believed fear was something other people felt. He thought about long roads, warm campfires, cheap whiskey, and women who had thrown drinks in his face. He thought about how strange it was that after all these years, after everything he had survived, his end might come from a creature small enough to fit inside a boot. The bedroom door moved. A black shape slipped through. The cat walked in and stood right in front of the bed. It looked at Billy. Billy looked at the cat. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The cat's tail swayed slowly behind it. Billy aimed right between its glowing eyes. His fear changed into a wild smile. "Got you now," he whispered. He pulled the trigger. Click. Billy blinked. "What?" He pulled the trigger again. Click, then again. Click. "Come on," he hissed. Click, click, click. The revolver was empty. Billy looked at the gun as if it had betrayed him in the worst possible way. The cat tilted its head. Billy's face twisted with anger and defeat. Forget it, he snapped. He threw the empty revolver at the cat. He missed by more than a country mile. The gun hit the floor near the dresser and slid under it with a sad little scrape. The cat did not even flinch. Billy fell back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. "Well," he said, breathing hard, "I suppose this is it." He closed his eyes and accepted his fate. He imagined the creature climbing onto him, sinking its cursed claws into his chest and stealing his soul through his nose. He imagined the newspapers the next day, if anyone even cared enough to write about him. Old man found dead in bed. Cause unknown. House full of bullet holes. Whiskey spared, the bed shifted. The cat jumped onto Billy's chest. Billy tensed. He waited for death. Instead, the cat turned in a small circle, folded its paws under itself, and settled down. Then it began to purr. The sound was soft and steady. It vibrated through Billy's chest like a tiny engine. The cat's eyes slowly closed, and its body relaxed against him. Billy opened one eye. The cat did not attack. It did not bite. It did not drag him to hell. It just lay there, warm and calm, purring like it owned the bed, the room, the house, and Billy himself. Billy stared at it in confusion. The creature was small, black, and covered in soft fur. Its ears twitched a little. Its whiskers moved with each breath. It looked nothing like the demon Billy had imagined. It looked like a tired little cat that had been trying to get out of the cold. For a while, Billy did not move. Then the fear started to drain out of him. His breathing slowed. His hands stopped shaking. The whiskey, the late hour, the warm weight of the cat, and the long battle against nothing all began to catch up with him. He looked toward the broken window downstairs in his mind. He thought about the shattered plates, the hole in Uncle Roy's picture, the bullets in the floor and ceiling, and the empty revolver under the dresser. Then he looked down at the cat. The cat opened one eye, stared at him, and gave one tiny, sleepy sound. "Meow," Billy sighed. "You are a wicked thing," he whispered. The cat started purring louder. Billy's eyelids grew heavy. He had spent all night preparing for war, and somehow the war had ended with a cat sleeping on his chest. He lifted one hand slowly and placed it on the cat's back. The fur was soft. The cat did not run. It only pressed a little closer and kept purring. Billy shook his head and let out a tired laugh. "You win this round," he muttered. The cat stretched one paw across his shirt like it was claiming him. Billy yawned. "You win this round, Mr. Mittens." Then the old cowboy closed his eyes, and for the first time all night, the house was peaceful. The clock kept ticking on the wall. The wind moved through the broken window downstairs. Somewhere in the dark, glass glittered across the wooden floor. The white cowboy hat lay forgotten near the chair. The empty revolver sat useless under the dresser. And on Billy Bat's chest, the great night demon slept like a king.